It is Monday, friends. That means it's time for a Q&A. So for those of you just joining us, all you have to do is leave your comments down below, and hopefully they'll show up on next week's show. I just wanted to thank everybody for the messages, comments on Twitter. I had a pretty bad weekend. I lost a loved one that I grew up with. It's the first time that I've ever lost somebody in my family that I was very close to, and it's, processing it is very strange. It's the first time I've ever, felt grief like this, and it's, I don't know, it's strange, but all of your comments, they do mean a lot, and I just wanted to thank everybody. You all are genuinely incredible people. So, with that being said, let's get on to some fun, okay? So the first question comes from Machine Snow, who says, Q&A. At least with the Halo content creators that I watch, the topic of Infinite's campaign DLC is often brought up. Do you think DLC will be made for Infinite? And if it would be made, how do you think it will affect the multiplayer, and more specifically, the monetization of the multiplayer? If you get to this question, thank you and keep up the great work. Multiplayer will probably have its own microtransaction system that will fund further development and stuff into the multiplayer modes and experiences. What worries me a little bit about campaign DLC is you're gonna have your Microsoft pencil pushers, your bean counters and stuff that are gonna be looking at how players spend in multiplayer versus players who spend in the campaign. So if they see that more people will be sinking money into multiplayer purchases and the campaign DLCs are kind of on the weaker end of the money being brought in every month, I'm worried that that means that we'd see a scaling down of production value for the campaign. Less risks taken, less money being pumped into these high quality campaign experiences. It's just a concern that I do have. I mean, I don't really know how money systems work, so probably somebody who's more educated could explain to me if that concern is valid, but I'm expecting that the campaign probably won't have a lot of overlapping into the multiplayer as far as purchases go. I personally would like to see some of our multiplayer progression stuff carry into the campaign. I would not mind actually seeing some of my skins from the multiplayer transfer into single player. The Master Chief Collection is going to be doing that soon. For Combat Evolved, it's currently still in development, but the publishing team did say that the plan is your multiplayer skins that you unlock will be usable in the campaign. And I think that would be pretty cool for Halo Infinite to do as well. And I hope that that answered your question. I do think there will be a separation between campaign monetization and multiplayer monetization. But with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question, which comes from The Calm Clone, who says, Q&A, what do you think is the most important element of Halo's sandbox? So this is a really good question, and the reason I picked it is because interesting discussions can come from it. So, in my opinion, the most important aspect of Halo Sandbox is that not everything should be a traditional gun, if that makes any sense. What's really beautiful about kind of the classic Halo games is that there were a lot of just kind of garbage weapons if your goal was to go on killing sprees when you pick them up. There were a lot of weapons that just did not function as good killing tools. Rather, they functioned kind of outside of that. I think of the plasma pistol actually as a very good example. You're not going to get killing sprees with the plasma pistol, but if you combine its unique EMP effects with a weapon that is good at killing, there you go, you have something interesting going on. Or I think of the Brute Shot, where that thing is not as good as the Fuel Rod gun as far as explosives go, but the Brute Shot is really good at disrupting players as well as the vehicles that they're in. Unload an entire clip into a Warthog and you can send it flying off in the distance just because of how concussive each shot is. Or even the Halo 3 Gravity Hammer. The Energy Sword, that's a good melee weapon. The Gravity Hammer in Halo 3, isn't quite, it's a little bit clunkier than the energy sword, but what the gravity hammer is very good at is that concussive force that it just lets out. You're throwing objects all around the environment. It's even knocking the player back because of how powerful it is. So you may not get a lot of melee kills with the gravity hammer, but you can use it as an interesting tool to move objects where you need them to be, as well as lift yourself up by swinging at the ground and jumping at the same time. With Halo 5, a lot of weapons started to be tuned around their lethality. If a weapon didn't kill good enough, it was buffed so that now it kills things. There wasn't a lot of that creativity, you know, every weapon in Halo 5 is kind of a utility weapon. They're all just good at killing, and they don't do a lot more interesting things outside of that. Same with vehicles. Halo 5, an issue I do take with it is that a lot of its ideas for innovative vehicles are one-man killing spree vehicles. There isn't a lot of just new stuff that's interesting. The Wasp and the Phaeton, I think, are kind of boring as vehicles. Not that their presentation is bad, because they're fine, you know, they feel good to pilot. Just that we've already got a single-use vehicle in Halo. It's called the Banshee, aerial speaking. I'd like to see a little bit more variety. I'd like to see an aerial vehicle that isn't one man. I'd like to see the Falcon or the Hornet come back. That's not to say that they're all boring, because some are actually a little bit interesting. I think that the Hydra is interesting when you get it into custom games and you kind of goof off with it. I think of those like game modes where you have people on very thin platforms, they have unlimited health, and they've got Hydras, and you're kind of trying to push each other off of the platforms. I think something that makes Halo Sandbox very important is that level of variety. There needs to be the sandbox items and the vehicles that aren't solely around killing. Those weapons and those vehicles that bring out a rather creative and unique side of players, where they find a tool and they think, I'm not going to get a lot of kills with this, but I could do this and this and this, and it'll change the way that the game plays. It'll disrupt the enemy team. A weapon I'm constantly pitching to my friends is a harpoon gun. If you shoot it at the floor below you from an elevated position, you've now got a zipline that your friends can use. If you use the harpoon gun on a vehicle or a scarab, you can kind of lock it down and chain it down to a specific location, and it needs to actually break the harpoon in order to continue moving forward. You can make kind of trip wires that'll send vehicles flying if they run into them. Just, you know, fun stuff like that. Halo Sandbox is so vast and so creative that they all can't be limited by just if they can kill another player. It's got to be more than that. There's got to be a little bit more variety. So the next question comes from Upstream Lotus Zero, who says, Q&A. When recording the sounds and uploading them to YouTube, an explosion sound made all the wildlife in the forest they were recording in quiet down. However, in the game, they show the birds chirping seconds after the player killed 3 grunts. Do you think they will address this, or at least look at it? What are your opinions of the wildlife ambience, and how it should return in Halo Infinite? So that's actually a very good point that you brought up. In fact, that's probably something you can tweet at some of the sound designers at 343, or even the community managers. Sound and ambient sound in video games is a really hard subject just in general, because sometimes you almost need to ignore how real life sound works, because the players are expecting it to sound very different. I think of everyone jumps to the topic of a sniper rifle, where if somebody is firing a sniper from a distance, the bullet's gonna hit its target before you even hear the gunshot, because the bullet is moving faster than the speed of sound. But in a video game, players are gonna want to hear that gunshot first, and then the bullet hitting the target. Something I even noticed recently, that now that I've seen it, I can't get it out of my mind. It's completely ruined the game for me. Far Cry 5, whenever you get into a car, all outside sound is muffled. Even if the windshield is broken or the car door's window is down, it's just suddenly, boom, you're in this sound vacuum and the outside ceases to exist. And it just drives me crazy. And it's obviously, you know, I'm being hyperbolic. It didn't ruin the game for me. But that's just kind of an example of when you're a sound designer and stuff. there are little mistakes that you'll make, or in some cases it's genuinely a tech issue that you can't work through and you just kind of pray that the player won't notice that this happened. In the comments section below, what are some sound quirks, whether they're good details or things that you wish Halo would do better that you personally notice in the Halo series? And be as nitpicky and specific as possible. That kind of stuff is a lot of fun for discussions. So the next question comes from Ashton Joseph Alexander, who says, Q&A. This is more lore-wise, but at the end of Halo 3, Guilty Spark seemed to depict humans as the descendants of the Forerunners. But in Halo 4, 343 took a different direction, saying that humans encountered the Forerunners while running from the Flood. Was this a writer's mistake, or is there something I'm just missing in the lore of Halo? So this is a topic that's debated within small portions of the community quite heavily. You've got a lot of people that do interpret that line from 343 Guilty Spark as Bungie clarifying that humans are Forerunners. They are the exact same thing. Then you've got some people that are saying actually that was more up to debate because stuff in Halo 3 does reference humanity as a separate entity from the Forerunners. And I kind of now want to talk about it a little bit more in depth. Bungie was never too sure on the origins of the Forerunners, where they came from and their relationship to humanity. There were always vague ideas internally. Some folks at Bungie thought that, I think the Forerunners are ancient humans. Then there were some people that disagreed and saw them as a different entity, and it's actually reflected in Halo 3. 343 Guilty Spark has that line, but the terminals in Halo 3 paint a different story, where you see data logs from Forerunners that are talking about humans as a different species. So, it's more of a symptom of Bungie just not really agreeing on a direction to take the story in. Now, what 343 has done to kind of wrap it all up in a neat bow and kind of set in stone what's going on is ancient humanity were a very different species to what we are now in the modern age. Humans as we know them, like modern day humans, were actually kind of a genetic experiment. Like basically the Forerunners took humans, modified their DNA a lot, even tweaked some of our physical features to make us appear more Forerunner-y, and then kind of reseeded the planet Earth with this new species of humanity. And that's kind of what 343 has come up with as a solution. We are the descendants of the Forerunners in the way that they kind of created us. And what's kind of interesting about this debate is I actually fall on both sides. I like both sides of the argument. As far as Forerunners being ancient humans, that's kind of a fun little, like, sci-fi trope that it's like, oh, they were us all along, it's just fun when that happens in science fiction. And there is kind of a lot of fun that comes from the idea that these were all ours once upon a time, these monolithic ancient ruins. But on the other side, I also kind of like that the Forerunners were very alien to us. They were a different being entirely, and that we are the genetic creation of them. We do have ancient descendants, a spacefaring empire that was defeated by the Forerunners, and as punishment, the Forerunners devolved that empire and even started making genetic modifications to them. We are just like those ancient ruins the Forerunners left behind. We're the creations of them that outlived the creators. I think that that's kind of interesting, and it makes the Halo universe seem a little bit larger. So the next question comes from Give Me Butter, who says, Q&A, what are your first impressions on Destiny 2 Beyond Light and the Destiny Content Vault? And do you have any concerns for the both of them? So the reason that I'm actually bringing up this question is because it is interesting and even kind of relates a little bit to Halo Infinite, if Halo Infinite will be the platform for Halo going forward. So Destiny 2 and its Content Vault, essentially what's going on there for some of you not in the loop is that Bungie did not design Destiny 2 to be a game that is sustained over many, many years. The idea was we're going to pump out Destiny 2 and then a Destiny 3 is going to happen. Well, now that Bungie is separated from Activision, Destiny 2 is going to be Destiny going forward. and they're going to be removing a lot of content from the game because the game is simply getting too big. The code is a little bit complicated because it wasn't designed for longevity in the first place. It makes adding new content harder because you can't retroactively break old content. So basically just a lot of things from the game are being removed in Destiny 2's upcoming DLC Beyond Light, so that Bungie can re-engineer them behind the scenes, redesign them, as well as just kind of do a lot of maintenance work on the code itself so that it can better support long-term sustainability. I'm actually in the camp of supporting this. It also helps that a lot of the content Bungie is removing is just not good. Like, the game is kind of better without it, like the terrible campaigns and stuff, and only leaving in the good campaigns. But there's also an issue with, well, content ownership and stuff, because they are also going to be removing a lot of DLC that people have paid for, and myself included. And the way that I see it is, so some of those DLCs that they're removing, the Curse of Osiris, Warmind, and stuff like that, I've gotten many hours out of those deals. Like, my money was more than worth it for the amount of hours that I got out of that content, and I have no interest in replaying it. So its removal, I'm not going to shed a tear for. But I do empathize and think that a lot of the concerns are valid. On the topic of Halo Infinite now, how's 343 going to kind of approach game bloat? The game becoming too large. Halo 5, I think, does not feel good under the hood. The UI is very sluggish. The rec menu takes quite a while to load up, and just overall, there's a subtle delay in the menu. It's very hard to explain. Maybe other people feel it too, but just progressively over time, since the launch of Halo 5, with each monthly addition to the game, it felt slower under the hood, like the game's UI elements and stuff were taking a little bit longer to respond than they should have. And I'm worried about Halo Infinite. Like, what's Halo Infinite gonna be like 4 years down the line? Is it gonna be this buggy mess that is 300 gigabytes large? Like, how's Halo Infinite gonna approach content bloat? But just, yeah, let me know how you feel down below, because there probably are going to be some people who disagree with me about certain topics, or some people that feel a little bit differently. Just, you know, let's have some discussions about that topic. So the next question comes from Aug8, who says, Q&A. If the scarab were to return in Halo Infinite, how do you think 343 could make it more interesting to fight and less of a drop what you're doing, get aboard, and destroy the thing type scenario? So Halo 3's scarab battle, I think, is one of the most clever sandbox encounters that Bungie and just Halo in general has ever designed. I don't think Halo ever even approached that same level of creativity, even going into Halo 5, a next-gen Halo game. Just after that, Halo kind of stagnated in the sandbox department and regressed a little bit. The scarab, what's kind of interesting about it is that it takes the issue of Halo doesn't really do boss battles too well and recontextualizes it into, well, it's not a big thing with a health bar. Now it's just a large sandbox puzzle that you need to overcome. The storm, when the scarab first shows up, it's an incredibly interesting situation because you've got a ton of vehicles, a ton of rockets, as well as missile pods and marine AI. You've got this ramp that you can use with a mongoose to get onto it, or if you want, you can bring it to its knees and board that way, but there's also this crane up ahead, and if you want, you can get the scarab to move under the crane and hop. You know, there's a lot of different ways to approach the sandbox problem that was presented to the player. Now, a concern I would have in Halo Infinite is I wouldn't know if maybe you'd have to kind of break some of your own rules and be like, well, the grappling hook can't actually grab onto scarabs, even though it can grab onto everything else, so you'd have to find a way to make the grappling hook not the obvious choice that every player would use. You'd have to kind of approach it in a lot of different ways. You know, player gameplay can't be the only way that you bring that thing down. You'd have to kind of add a lot of interesting things like shade turrets around the place. You could lure the scarab over to a stack of like fuel canisters and stuff and blow out one of the legs so it falls over so you can board. You know, you'd have to approach it in a very sandboxy way. And finally, we're going to close off the Q&A with a question from Lazy Dragon, who says, Q&A, what do you think of 343 adding space battles to Halo Infinite's multiplayer? Ever since Halo Reach and the Long Night of Solace, I've dreamed of space battles or air battles taking place in the heavens, much like Battlefield or the new Star Wars Squadrons handles them, except without Banshees going only 20 to 25 miles per hour and being super slow and whatnot. So this is not actually a new topic. This is something that has been in the community for quite a while and definitely got a lot of energy with Halo Reach's Long Night of Solace mission. I'm in the camp of people that didn't actually like Long Night of Solace. I think Halo is more fun when the vehicles feel very arcadey and stuff, and that there is a seamless transition between on-foot and vehicle combat. At any moment you can get out of your vehicle and run around. So locking the player to that very specific gameplay style was a little bit different for me, and it was kind of a bitter pill to swallow, and as a result I didn't really like Long Night of Solace that much. That being said, that doesn't mean that that idea should not be explored further, because I do think that mission tapped into something interesting, and the fact that the community is still vocal about space battles means there are people in the community that want to see that idea expanded upon, and I do think 343 should take a look at some of those people and maybe explore options on how that space battle fantasy in the Halo universe can actually be done. Now, the problem with it being a proper developer-made space battle mode with its own matchmaking and everything is really player interest, because Star Wars Battlefront 2 was a game with an incredible space battle mode. It was genuinely one of the best modes in that game. I'm talking about the new Battlefront 2. The space battle combat in that game was really good, and unfortunately, most players in that game preferred the infantry combat, so if you try to matchmake in that game mode, it's kind of hard. You're always running into laggy servers, low population, and it's kind of smart that EA is branching off that incredible space combat module into its own proper game with Star Wars Squadrons. And so with Halo Infinite, I can see a problem there of if the player base isn't there, that mode will die fast. So what I would like is 343 giving players in Forge lots of tools to really create a space battle type game mode. Beef up the Forge production value a little bit. Let players mess with like gravity volumes and stuff. Let players have outer space backdrops, multiple different ones. Let players spawn in cruisers and stuff like, let people create this game modes. That way, 343 can put the proper production value into the modes that will be popular, and we don't have a situation of like Breakout in Halo 5 where way too much time was spent on that mode that ultimately not a lot of people were going to end up playing or even liking. There are people that do like Breakout, but people didn't really ask for that mode, and it kind of died very shortly after release, even after they tried to kind of fix a lot of people's problems by updating it. All they ended up doing was alienating the actual Breakout players and not really changing anything else, because the people who didn't like it weren't going to play it anyways. And guys, that wraps up this Monday. I hope you all enjoyed. Leave your questions down below. And currently the video I am working on is the port report for ODST, which I got early access to, and you guys can look forward to that. Later this week, I'm going to be going to New York for the funeral, so, I'm going to try to see if I can get all this done before then. But yeah, I hope you guys have a good week, and I'll see you on the next video.